Okay. Hello, welcome back. I've been getting into some season ticket baseball and enjoying it very much. And to talk with me about season ticket baseball is Kurt Bergland. Um, when I asked him to join me, he said that he wasn't necessarily a season ticket expert, but I think most would agree he is a cards and dice baseball game expert. So I appreciate him helping me out and talking about this good game.
Well, thanks for inviting me. This is a lot of fun. I don't get many invites.
Really?
This is fun for me. So
Okay.
thank.
Well, thank you for doing it. Um, I always like to start, and I think I got this from Dave Gardner, but it's enjoyable to hear. What got you into your first foray into cards and dice, sports sims, or baseball, whichever came first?
Okay. Well, the first sim that I played a lot was Sports Illustrated Superstar Baseball,
Okay.
and right now I'm like I don't know 8 years old, maybe 9. And at that time, Sports Illustrated Superstar Baseball had something like 105 or 110 player set. And my brother and I, and even my dad sometimes played a lot of that. And that was followed by, in pretty quick order, Stratomatic Baseball, where we played the basic version. And then came Sherco Baseball.
Okay.
And then after that, in the late 70s, what else did I try? Got into APA around 1980. And I guess those were the four big ones that got me into it. Played Stratomatic a lot through the 80s.
Okay.
And into the early 90s, I guess. And then I got into trying other sims again in that sort of time period, and raising a family and doing all that stuff. And then what would have been the next one, I guess, that got me? I was heavily into a game with my kids called MLB Showdown in the early part of this century, and I used that. It was fun, but it was also a way to teach my daughters about baseball, and they liked it because it almost had like a Pokemon feel,
Okay.
and they were used to that. And then when my channel started, I was able to really discover a lot of other sims, like Fall Classic and Replay and Play Ball and boy, Mental Block. Just a whole bunch of different sims. I think I've probably demoed on my channel somewhere around 30 different sims. Some of them are dead. Some of them, the companies don't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But some of them are still alive in the creativity of the gamers themselves, kind of creating their own cards. And some of them are still being sold actively. So Ron Juckett has said on more than one occasion that this is the golden age for baseball sims, and I think there's no question that he's right.
Yep.
And I think that season ticket certainly fits into that golden age era. And I started playing that particular sim in the early winter of 2019.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because this is a little unusual for baseball sims in that it seems to be kind of stretched out a little bit. I mean, again, I haven't had as much experience with different sims as you have, but typically they come out, and then they'll make adjustments, as the game evolves. But this actually seemed more like, okay, here's a demo, and then it's kind of evolved from that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. Although I will say, and I mean, I think that this is one of the things that makes season ticket really good is that there's two things that kind of come together for me. One is that Clay Dresslock, the designer, uh, he understands both math and baseball,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't say that really about every
Mm-hmm.
designer. Number one, and then number two, he sort of merges that with an interest in what his customer base wants and thinks.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's kind of pulled that together. Now, what the effect of that has been to me is that it has probably slowed the arrival at a final version of season ticket more than it would have been otherwise if Clay had said, well, you know what? I'm going to sit in my basement. I'm going to crank this thing out and feedback be damned.
Mm-hmm.
Then, I mean, he would have been done a long time ago, but he didn't do that. And so we've got this merge of the customer base and his own creativity going on, and I think that's sort of the journey that's happened. I do think, from what I've read from his comments online, I do think that he's probably more than 95% finished in terms of I don't even want to say revisions, little tweaks, I guess, to the game. It seems like he's about done.
Mm-hmm.
And so now he's launched into the next phase of it, which is producing cards that can be shipped and delivered to. I mean, because he started out for several years, it was just PDFs. And now the cards are available and the sim is available in hard copy. And so all of that is, to me, it's pretty much saying this is what it's going to be. And what he's doing now is filling in with seasons. And that's what he should be doing. I mean, it makes sense.
Now, for those who don't know, he was the creator, designer of Baseball and Football Mogul. So I imagine that probably that experience informed, his creation of this game. And I agree. One thing about Clay is, well, first off, I'd recommend anybody interested in the game find all they can. There's a Facebook group. There's quite a few really good Delphi forum, and you will learn a lot. So I recommend you go to those two places, read that. I actually found some things a little extra, like I got this. Can't see it because it's too bright, but basically out or a single where the base hits go. That's not in the game, but something that he had created that I found. So things like that, and you get a lot of insight into what he's thinking on some different things. Some things that we're going to talk about today. He spoke to them a little bit in those areas, so I'd recommend that. But and I would agree, reading his discussions, the man knows a lot about the game and a lot about sims. And so a big issue with any sports sim, and I think especially for baseball, because I think baseball guys tend to be a little crazier, is that that trust factor. And so when you read Clay talk, and you get the real impression that the guy knows what he's doing.
Yes, absolutely. And like I said, it's not enough to understand baseball if you're going to create a really memorable sim, but you have to understand the math side of it too. And I think he merges those two things really well. And that's why I think that, I mean, when I look at season ticket, it's his understanding of baseball that, to me, when I look at the future of the hobby, I mean, this one is a sim that I look at and say this one's going to be around because they've got both those things.
Mm-hmm.
He understands modern statistics, analytics, but he can do it in a way that makes sense to a gamer and that works mathematically. And if you can't do those things, you might have something that's fun, you might have something that plays really well, but it may or may not be statistically accurate. And so I think that's a really important combination that Clay has.
Yeah, that having dug into it myself, I'm a little surprised it hasn't grown more than it has. And I think you probably hit the nail on the head. That I think a lot of people are kind of waiting for the final version to come out.
Yeah.
I know in doing some reading, that's been a bit of a concern because, I mean, if you invest, this is being a little critical, but, if you invest printing off the PDFs, which, it's not a cheap not a cheap investment, and then they change, that can be a bit frustrating. So I think that's probably why it hasn't grown faster than it has. But I think, like you said, once it gets settled, to me, this one competes with the big boys.
Yes, I agree. And I think, I mean, it's a difficult call because if you ignore your customer base, if you ignore feedback, well, now maybe you're missing something. Maybe you're missing something that would actually make your product either better or more marketable or both.
Mhm.
And so I don't know. I mean,
Oh,
I've never been responsible for designing an entire sim on my own. So I don't know how I would react to that or how I'd handle that particular challenge, but the product is good stuff. I mean, he accounts for a lot of different elements of the game of baseball that we kind of now understand as just part of the game. That
mhm,
if you don't have it, it's almost like something's missing. And I'm thinking um, right now of the way that he handles ballparks.
mhm,
To me, there's no sim available that really incorporates ballparks to the level of detail
mhm,
that he does. I really get a sense when I play season ticket that I'm in a unique park with
mhm,
unique characteristics that are going to have a particular impact on player performance. And no two parks are going to be alike in that sim.
mhm,
A lot of sims account for ballparks, but they aren't unique. And you don't really get a sense of the park from looking at either the card or the ratings or however it's accounted for
mhm,
that particular sim. And he's got something there. I mean, he understands how that works and he's able to do it not in an add-on way, but it's built into the regular roles as part of the system. And that, boy, oh boy, I mean that just doesn't come along. And so I think he's out front in that, and that's a good example of how he thinks.
mhm. Yeah,
Uh,
there's a lot of things in this game that I have decided are brilliant.
mm,
Now, talking about the ballparks, or going back to what we were talking about originally, I think having read one thing that he's trying to do now is any adjustments that need to be made, he's trying to make them in the ballpark.
wow,
He's trying to get the card set and then make any adjustments as he goes along into the ballparks, which I think is really good because he makes the ballparks public domain, and they're all every year are downloadable on his website. And so that way, if you invest in the cards and print them off, going forward, hopefully, that way, you all you have to do is just download the ballparks, which is a much smaller investment than doing all the cards.
right,
The second thing about this, and this is kind of going to a different topic, is he says that these cards are normalized. So what that means is that you can take Steve Sachs and put him in 1920, and the cards themselves are normalized. Where the differences come in, if I understand this correctly, is on the ballparks. So that's where 68 is 68,
mm,
and 98 is 98 is on the cards. So have you heard about that or read about that or any thoughts on that?
I've heard him say that. It's very, I mean, normalization, of course, is a challenge for the hobby. I mean, the in broad strokes, there's two types of gamers. One is the season replay person. The other one's the tournament person or the one-off person. And the normalization is not something that many sims have tried to tackle
None
because
that I know of, at
yeah,
least cards and dice.
right. And so he's gearing this toward the tournament person or the one-off person, and I think that's another unique piece of the game. I mean, the thing that I would say is that I have played, let's see, the 70s, the 80s, the 60s, and some teams from the 90s as well. And I don't find season ticket to be especially era bound. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many sims that I see that are good for a time period and maybe not so good
Right.
for the development of the game in some way, or going further back, maybe the regression of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe the normalization piece of that is part of why I feel like that. But I had a point and I've lost it. So I mean, the game, the history of the game, so much to me is understood through the parks and the turf, or artificial, or if you go far enough back, life threatening in the dead ball era,
Right.
or to what we have today. And so I think that is all. I mean, the wonderful part there is that if the parks are the variable and the players are normalized, so those will be fairly understandable through eras. I think that's what it really screams to me, is that the ability to do that means that you can make special sets. You can make
Oh yeah.
you can make franchise all-star sets. You can make Hall of Fame sets. You can make you can make great teams or lousy team sets if you want to do it. I mean, all of that makes it a possibility without making your outcomes, without guaranteeing really that the 27 Yankees are going to win every outcome that you get, because they were such monsters in that season.
All right.
So it really opens some things up for him that maybe other sims can't do very well.
Yeah, I'm not a math nerd. I am a baseball geek.
Right.
And so you probably have more experience. So if he is indeed pulled that off, to me that is just huge. Because again, a lot of the reason I'm a seasoned gamer myself. I like seeing Joe DiMaggio and his element. But and a big issue of why I prefer that is how it's always been is the normalization. It's 1919 or 1905 compared to 1998 to 1968. It's a little apples and oranges. Because the norm was a lot different in 68. 1998, and so that just doesn't seem like a fair comparison. So if he's able to kind of normalize it somehow and pull that off, that would make me much more likely, to do projects like that.
Right. I think that, to me, the confounding part about normalization is how much are you going to normalize? Are you going to normalize just the stats? Are you going to the offensive stats? Are you going to normalize the pitching in some way? Because now you have to take into account, what are you going to do with walks for pitchers in the 40s and 50s? What are you going to
Errors.
out totals? What are you going to do with errors? Range is so much different.
Oh yeah.
And we don't even really know. I mean, to me, the most difficult part of any sim in terms of design is defense, because we don't really have stats that are settled that really reflect defensive play, that are, what do I want to say, sort of agreed upon by baseball nerds like
Mhm.
us. And um, so, how do those defensive abilities translate from one era to the other? I was just looking the other day at Tris Speaker, and I was looking at his career. And Tris Speaker is one of those guys to me that, like, how good was he? I
Mhm.
mean, we know that in the context of his era, he was really good. But is this guy really somebody who transcends his era and defensively is comparable to, I don't know, Mays or DiMaggio or Mantle or, um, I mean, pick a center fielder, and I just don't know. And so, and if you look at the metrics, you sort of get a sense of him, but it's not like offense. And
Mhm.
so normalizing defense, it seems to me, would be really, really challenging. And of course, part of that is a understanding of ballparks, but and how ballparks have changed. But there's so much more to it than that. There's throwing arms, there's errors, there's bases advanced on hits that are hit to that outfielder. There's just a huge amount. And nobody in, or at least I should say, there is no consensus that I've seen about what makes a good defensive player. And so it's difficult to build that into a sim and really feel satisfied that you've got it.
Yeah, there's a lot of subjectivity in that area.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
now
And
that's another thing I was going to ask you. I think because of the nature, I mean, I see a lot of different sims in this game, but to me, Strat is the one that compares to it the most. And I think because of the 50/50 engine, which just really isn't a 50/50 engine, which we'll talk about. But when so he's done 1950 through the present, and that's what he has available, which is great. However, I've read and I wonder myself, when you put out that many seasons, how detailed is it? And the reason I say that is that when I picture Strat, you get to, and again, this is just me being around the hobby, you get the vision of, uh, you know, dozens of men, in a room, poring over the box scores, arguing, Tris speakers, range, and they come out with them so rare, it almost lends itself to that. There's, this huge amount of research. You see what I'm getting at?
I do.
Whereas he comes out with, that many seasons at once. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I know that when I used to create cards for um, Pine Tar, that I would create the cards and then I'd go to my local Office Depot because I wanted to run some copies and do some proofing.
Mhm.
And the guy that worked at this Office Depot said to me, "Wow, how long does this take you to do?" And I would say, "Well, this takes me about 6 hours to do one team. If I'm lucky, I might do it in 5." And he says to me, "Oh my God, how are you doing that? How can you do that? You need data sets. You need lots and lots of data sets." And I said, "Well, yeah, you do. But I mean, if I've got a pitcher right on the edge here between one rating and another, or a defender between one rating and another, now I got to stop and think about that. I can't just crank that out."
Mhm.
And I think that the more that I mean, the more Clay has to sit and think, okay, which way am I going on this guy? Turns it into a sort of a card making by hand process. And I mean, what I was doing was crazy. I was perseverating about stuff that should have been, just
Right.
out. Clay's obviously got a system because he was able to fill in a half century of seasons in a fairly quick time period once he had settled on his process. And he doesn't worry that much about about very many of those judgment calls. I don't know how much Strat worries about the judgment calls right now either, but certainly, I mean, I think they used to. I don't know if they still do to that extent, but yeah, I see strat in it. It's a 50-50 sim. I think that if you like season ticket, you're gonna like deep drive. I see overlap there as well. And if you like deep drive, you're gonna love vice versa. You're gonna like season ticket. I think it's sort of unique that for I mean, so many sims that are popular now have gotten away from 50-50, and season ticket, you're right, I think. I mean, it's 50-50, but it's not really. It's certainly not a straight 50-50, but I think that people kind of use that term to help people get a mental picture of how the sim works. But I think that there are a few terms in the hobby. 50-50 is one of them. Batter pitcher interaction is another that people use so often and in such different ways. I don't think they mean anything anymore. It's like terrorism, like my terrorist isn't your terrorist.
Right.
So we don't even know what we're talking about anymore.
Yep.
And I think that 50-50 and batter pitcher interaction are a lot like that.
Yeah. So, I appreciate your thought. Now, he's also, I think, 1919 up to 1950 is what he's working on now. The last I heard, he's going to try to have those done by the end of July, which I'm really excited about. It'd be interesting to see, 1919 isn't dead ball, but it's, there's it's close enough to it that it's different than, 1950. But
sure, yeah, I think it, I mean, and I think that whole 1920 and before period, it's sort of evolving out of dead ball. Nothing. It's not like being pregnant. Either you are or you aren't. I think it's just kind of an evolution in the game, and I think that 1919 and 1920 for him are going to be particular challenges because I think that some sims do dead ball well, and I think some sims really struggle with them. It's that different set of variables that is such a challenge, and so yeah, I'm very curious to see what he does with those as well.
Now, going back to the 50-50, I want to talk about that a little bit. So again, the engine is kind of 50-50 with 5 being the defensive roles, 6 going to the ballpark. However, what he does, one of the issues with 50-50 is like the really odd things like Nellie Fox never striking out,
Right.
Bergland never walking anybody.
Right.
I think, and again, I'm not a math nerd, so you probably could speak to this more than I could, but the redirection. So what he does is like if you've got a strikeout pitcher, his 100, the one die, will have like a lot of redirections to the batter's strikeouts, basically is what it's doing. And so if you have a Nellie Fox, let's say you roll a 127, so that's going to be a redirection to the batter strikeout. Nellie Fox, his 327 will not be a strikeout. His strikeout's probably going to be 301 maybe. And so to me, that's brilliant. That's a wonderful way to the biggest critique to a 50-50 engine is that particular item. I think in incorporating that's a wonderful way to deal with that.
I do too. And that's why, I guess in the broad strokes, you can call it a 50-50 sim, but it doesn't have the problems that a typical 50-50 sim does. And it can account for outliers in individual performance without doing, in individual performance, like a strat type of sim can handle team outliers because you've got such a large sample size that can cope with that. But in terms of individual performance, the Dennis Eckersley, Nellie Fox problems, challenges, I should say, aren't here. So it's 50-50, but it's really, it doesn't fall prey to the 50-50 problems. And like you say, it builds in defense and ballparks in a way that makes it not really 50. If you say something is sort of 75 or 80% 50-50, you're not being very descriptive anymore, I don't think.
Yeah, well, with the redirections, even 33, 33, 33,
Yeah,
or whatever the percentages wouldn't work because the redirections change that.
right. So I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, yeah,
Again, to me, it works out really, really well. Um, let's see. Okay, let's talk about the rare plays, which to me these aren't really rare plays. They're more interesting plays, I would call them.
yeah.
Because they're not rare. Like for example, let me say this: as most people who follow the channel know, that Strat is my favorite. The two things that I would say, other than availability of seasons, that Strat struggles in is rare plays. Things that are interesting. You do get interesting things like 4 home runs, the cycle, things like that, no hitters.
Yep.
But interesting plays, there's just not much there. And the second thing is that the cards are kind of generic. Now they have personalization as to where the results are, which I like a lot. But they all the same color. There's not a lot of biographical information. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But going back to the variability, those rare plays, what keeps it fun so far for me is that you don't have any idea what's going to happen. So, like for example, I had there was a double down the left field line, a blooper. That wasn't a bloop hit. This was a rare play, and the runner on second only made it to third because he didn't know, if he was going to catch it or not. So it
Right,
was a double, and the guy. I mean, that's great, because you're not going to get that in any other sim.
right.
So to me, the rare plays aren't really rare plays. They're interesting plays.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And so often, like in other sims, you can get rare plays like Martians landing in the middle
Right.
that actually happen. And so yeah, the rare plays you can actually picture something, or maybe it is something that you've actually seen happen, and there it lands on your tabletop. And that's, I mean, that's a level of detail that is easy to ignore, is easy to say, you know what, that doesn't have to be part of what I'm doing, or that doesn't have to be part of what I'm creating. The gamer can sort of visualize that in their head if they want to, but it's fun. It just makes it different, and it adds something, a layer of realism that I think is, and I think that's part of what I was saying before too, is that this isn't an era-bound game. I mean, this isn't a game that specializes in the 50s. Like these types of rare plays are going to happen in any sort of situation and generation, and yeah, I appreciate those too. I mean, that's very, I mean, if you, unless you're having some kind of feedback where you're requesting people send in rare plays that they want to see, generating charts like that is a very time consuming
Hmm.
for very little uh benefit. I mean, you're just doing that for uh, faithfulness and in the integrity of what you're creating, not because this is going to be something that drives sales. So I just, yeah, I mean, that's part of what you get. And that's part of the reason why I haven't put more of it on my channel. I mean, when I play season ticket, I find myself kind of getting sidetracked into thinking about, okay, wow, let's think about this, and that slows me down.
Yep.
And I mean, my videos are long enough. I mean, I mean, it's like my videos turn into epics. And when you stop and think about um, why something's happening, or stop to picture something happening in your head, now that's got to be translated to the video, and that's got to be um, sort of made to come alive for the viewer. And that's been difficult for me to do, but it certainly is a fun part of the game for sure.
I love it. Again, I mean, it just keeps you coming back. It's like, and
Yeah.
rare plays, you have to be careful because you can overdo it. So I think it's about 1.5 a game is what it averages. But again, and I intentionally haven't read them because it's fun kind of watching them pop up,
Right.
but he just did a great job. They're mixed in well. And it just gives you that, Again, when I'm playing strat, which I love, and again, I mean, and hopefully people don't take these conversations as bashing. I think they're helpful, as we discuss what we like, don't like. It doesn't mean it's a bad game. It's just, I think it's helpful for people to hear, we all have different things that we like. So one thing with strat is it gets a little robotic, double, single, triple, home run, ground out. When you have something like, a guy on second only making it to third on a double, that to me, that's like being at a real ball game. Because I thought about this when I haven't been to baseball much lately, but when I was younger, I'd go all the time. And part of what kept me going back was that anything could happen. I might see a no-hitter tonight or some kind of weird, unusual play. That kept me interested in real baseball. I'm finding that this keeps me really interested in coming back and wanting to play this again.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yes. I'm in a face-to-face Stratomatic league, so I hope that what I'm saying is not a bash on Stratomatic at all. But there's no question. I mean, you can get a RP roll on an X chart of a 5 on Stratomatic, and okay, something cute just happened, but it's not anywhere near on the level of detail ticket has. And so if that's something that you're looking for, then that's something to think about as a prospective consumer, and it might save people a little bit of money.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. Okay. So I know he's also talked about doing some Negro League seasons, which would be super, super fantastic.
Yes.
We talked about defensive ratings being a little subjective. I think Negro Leagues, just because of the nature of how, again, back then, they made more money barnstorming, whereas, for the white ball players, the major leagues is where they wanted to play. It's where the money was, whereas for the black baseball players, not so much. And so anytime you're trying to recreate that, I think there's a bit of that guessing, as to what needs to be done. You can't go just off the stats. Is that fair to say, would you say? Or
I do. Yeah, I do. But we know so much more now.
yeah, no doubt.
And seam heads has been so important
Mm-hmm.
in expanding our understanding from a statistical standpoint of what these guys were able to do. That I think that, and I read so often on Delphi and on Facebook, people say, well, internet guy. Well, we don't really know much about the Negro Leagues. Well, that's just not true. I mean, it may have been true in 1985 or 1975, but it's not true anymore. And that's why earlier this year I made a video about APA's Negro League set being, it was produced in the early 90s and it's hopelessly out of date. And I was so happy to see that John Herson for APA is saying, well, we're going to update the set. Now, I hope they actually do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that there is enough there where the judgment calls about player accomplishments and player abilities are much fewer than they used to be, much less in the dark. And there is some quantifiable data that can help in those judgments. And that's where I think Clay can really go to town and make some card sets, especially for players who played in the 20s and 30s and 40s,
Mm-hmm.
and had a pretty good idea of what it was that these guys were about. And so 20 years ago, would I have said this? Maybe not. 30 years ago, definitely not. But I think now we're getting pretty close, and there's additional research coming all the time. And I think that that combined with the firsthand accounts that we have from players that played the game with these guys really paints a pretty good picture. So I hope that I'm very hopeful that Clay will produce those sets quickly, because I would love to see what he does with those.
Yeah, if anybody could pull off that particular, specialty, I think he definitely would be one that would do a great job.
Right. The ballparks alone would be
That'd be interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Now, one thing that you saw this with Stratomatic, For some reason, when I need his name, I keep forgetting. Who created Stratomatic?
Hal Richmond.
Hal Richmond. Ease of play was a big thing for him. As I've read Clay, the same thing. And I believe he's really pulled that off. So, like for example, you can get as detailed as you would like, and the amount of detail that he has added into this, it just blows my mind. But when you add them, it's not jumping through hoops. Matter of fact, most of the things that you check, you don't need to even re-roll. So, like for example, if you're trying to get a lead, if the two 10 die are under a certain amount, it's a pickoff. If it's over, the pitcher throws it away. When you're trying to steal, the pitcher gets another chance to pick off, or the catcher throws it away if they're over the catcher's E rating, which he calls fielding rating. His error rating is called fielding rating. So again, you roll one die, you get all that information. Again, I see that as brilliant. You get basically as much depth as you want without having to add a lot of extras.
I agree. There's two criteria that I use for evaluating a sim. The first one is, am I learning anything about the teams and the players?
Mm-hmm.
If I am, the second question is, am I enjoying myself? Which means that, is this easy to play? Part of that is, are the directions clear? Mm-hmm. And then the other part of that is, how are the things that I need to do in terms of chart lookups or re-rolls minimal, as minimal as possible. I don't find re-rolling to be enjoyable. I don't find it to be building drama. Mm-hmm. And so by setting up the systems that he's got, where the vast majority of what you're doing is accomplished in a roll, and occasionally two, but not
very rarely
or more. Yeah, I think that's a huge part. And I think the commitment to the D10 die is a very, 3 D10s, I would find it very difficult if I was creating a sim. If you're not using D10s in a contemporary game, I don't know how you get very close to statistical accuracy down to the level that we know the players can do in today's baseball world. Mm-hmm. So you're doing 3 D10s most of the time, and you're accomplishing it in one roll most of the time, the vast majority of the time. So how can you, both of my checks are there. Are you learning about the teams and the players? I think unquestionably you are, and probably the ballparks as well. And then the second part of it is the ease of play is there as well. It's not a constant re-roll. The directions are pretty clear. If you're going to play with all the bells and whistles, you might have to get some practice games in, but it's not going to take very long, and you're going to be doing it. The charts are readable. When you're going off the player card, there's not that many places to go to get your outcomes. So,
even the defensive checks are off the cards, and I know that you can use the ratings. I asked this on the forum, because at first he would, the primary position is on the card, and the secondary ones, you have to use the ratings. And at first it was, he had some where he would deviate from the ratings. But I asked on Facebook, and he said that the only one, and you probably won't like this because he's your favorite player, that the only one that he changed was Bill Buckner. Because so I think he changed like one to an E, run on second scores. Mm-hmm. But other than that one, you can go off the rating. So basically you can just write down the ratings on your score card like you can with any, right. And then pretty much what, like for example, the throwing arm is a double play for an infielder. Right. The range is if they get to it. The E, or the fielding rating, is their error. So again, once you know the system, you don't even need to look at the cards if you don't want to.
Right. Right.
But he
Yeah.
also go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Um, the detail, you can hit behind the runner, with very minimal, you can run and hit, as opposed to you can hit and run, but you can also run and hit. You can, one thing about Strat everybody hates is the infield in, ground ball B.
Yeah.
He's automatically out. Whereas in this one, you say, well, is he going to go on contact or not? And then he's got a chart, again, there's very minimal charts on this, but if you get a ground ball, then, if you say he's going on contact, and then when I'm playing, obviously, if he's fast, I say, or depending on how many outs. But my point is that level of detail, being able to hit behind the runner, if you want to try to, hit it to the right side of the infield, those are the things that interest me about baseball. And so
Right.
being able to have him in the sim without too much work is just great.
Yeah, I mean, he gets it. That's that sort of convergence of someone that understands math with someone that understands baseball, and then that person being creative enough to actually design a sim. I mean, there's not many humans out there that are able to do that. And
And
so,
conversely, if you don't like all that detail, you don't have to do it, and it doesn't hurt the game.
true, you can scale it back, and
Yep.
that's for sure as well. Yep, no question.
Um, his pitcher hitting cards,
Mm.
those are fascinating. I've never seen anything quite like that. So I know, like, for example, in Strat, the pitchers in my 1920 replay with the White Sox are quite a bit different than the pitchers in 83 Astros. Even the pitchers in 1920 didn't strike out a lot. So if you use the pitcher hitting card, that's going to, they're not going to be, it's not going to be terribly accurate, and
Right.
his pitcher, he's got like one card for everybody, and it's based off of your contact, your eye, and your power, and the pitcher has that rating. So being more of a math nerd, do you think that would kind of fix that issue?
Yeah, I would, and I think that the problem becomes, um, is the out going to be productive? So
Right.
I think that's where Strat, it's easy to build in strikeouts and leave them there because you don't want the out to be productive and the batter to, or the base runners to move, or
Mhm.
base runner to move on that particular out. So it's easy to build in strikeouts and sort of trap the guy at that base and say, well, that's close enough
Right.
for rock and roll. It's but yeah, I mean, his system makes sense that way, and there's no question that the ability of pitchers to make contact is different. The ability of pitchers to hit changed from decade to decade.
Mhm.
um I mean, it's just the game's evolved, and so it allows for, that's that part of that trapped in an era thing that I was talking about before. It's not, I mean, the sim shows how baseball sort of changed and can deal with that. And that's why the dead ball stuff is so interesting, because so often, for example, in a dead ball situation, you'd never think of pinch hitting for a pitcher. Like, they didn't do that
Right.
very often unless there was some compelling reason to do it. And so it's like a high school game. You just run those guys out there and you'd go for it, and you'd probably stick with your nine. And so the idea that, although I will say this, I came across an article from 1926 or 27 where the designated hitter was being discussed. They didn't know they were talking about the designated hitter, but they were definitely saying these pitchers can't hit.
Right.
So at some point, I mean, then of course it gained momentum over the decades, but the idea that the pitcher's ability to make contact has evolved, or to judge the strike zone, or to even to have a productive out, uh, has definitely changed over time. And of course, now we don't have to deal with that, I guess, in today's game. But um, it's I like how he's built that in. Is it something that's going to be, a deal breaker for a potential consumer? Probably not, but it's a very nice touch. It's
Yeah, I
very
mean, it's interesting. Again, how you handle pitchers hitting is, different from sim to sim. I've never seen where you just got one card, and then
right.
based off of that, about the ratings, then you decide what happens. So again, I haven't spent enough time with it to say more than it's just really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good point.
Okay, deep drives. I don't know if you can. It's like if you got a low number outcome, it's usually a single, double. In the middle are flyouts, and the higher is the home runs.
Right.
Would that penalize the guys with middle numbers? So, like for example, if you've got a zero power, the chances are you're probably going to get a single or a double. If you've got a higher power, the chances are you're going to get a flyout or a home run. If you've got a middle number, wouldn't you hit that flyout range more?
Yeah, and it seems like you would, and I think that is one of the challenges for even a 1920s set, it seems to me, or definitely a dead ball set, because you've got guys, you got, what would you say? You've got maybe 7, 8, 9 home runs, and you've got maybe 6 to 10 triples, and you got another low 20s for doubles. Now, where does that come out? I think that's a potential challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And so and not only that, but you're normalizing. So now you've thrown a whole new set of variables on top of that. So I think that's going to be, to me, that's an interesting part about the first half of the century, where so many players who maybe, because they didn't really value walks very much. A lot of players, a lot of managers didn't.
Mm-hmm.
You want to definitely avoid those strikeouts however you can. So you choke up 8 inches on the bat and slap. And so the game was different. And so in that deep drive section, how you're going to handle extra base hits and what that's going to look like from player to player. Yeah, I think that it seems like it would. I think you're right. Now, I mean, I finished the stats course and went, what? But, so he's got me. I'm sure he's got me beat in that area. But it's a challenge for any sim, and I don't see how a season ticket will be any different. So those early decades will definitely be an interesting this group of sets to look at.
Yeah, it'll be fun though.
Yes.
Couple things that are a little interesting. So there's some errors on the batter's card that have nothing to do with a range. So, like for example, like Ryan Sandberg has an 2-base E6 on his card. Reminds me a little bit of ATBA, where on ATBA Basic you get an error no matter who it is. So I'm guessing you've got like a baseline errors. So you doing some that going to happen no matter who it is, and then he adds the variableness onto in the ratings. Is that fair? Is that kind of how that would work, you think? And then conversely, he also has walks and strikeouts on the catcher's card on their defense section.
Right. So, well, a couple of things there. First, I think he could generate stats that determine that reflect how bad the error was that a player committed, and build that into what he's doing. Do I think he's doing that on a regular basis? No, I don't think he would, because now we're getting back into making cards by hand, and I don't see how he could do that and produce sets with the velocity that he's doing. But is it possible? Maybe he is. For players that have particularly unique error seasons.
Are there stats that show what a offensive player, how many errors are committed when he's batting?
Yeah.
Okay, so is it possible that I'm assuming that's where he would get that number. So is that to say you'd think that maybe he's saying that there's certain hitters hit the ball hard enough that is why they're given an an error on their hitting card?
I mean, that's the assumption. I mean, but the thing about those numbers is that those rarely, like, those are usually one season anomalies.
Mm-hmm.
And so nobody makes a career out of hitting the ball so hard that other players make errors on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
But and then that's where the normalization comes in. So now if you're going to normalize, you got to water that down somehow. But I mean, there are certainly some players who did it. And that's like the other part of what you were talking about with the catchers. I mean, pitch framing has become this thing where if you are, I mean, there's two pieces to catching that never used to be a big part of their evaluation. And one is wild pitches and pass balls. Those used to be just understood as sort of on the pitcher and really not the catcher's fault. Now they're seen, both of those are seen as very much the catcher's obligation to do. And the other one is pitch framing. So a particular catcher, certainly in an arbitration hearing or as part of their evaluation with their manager or general manager, I mean, pitch framing is part of the discussion. Didn't used to be that way. And so by building that into the cards as part of the catcher's ability and reflection, yeah, I mean, he's out in front of what other sims are doing unless they bake it into the outcome. So in other words, saying, okay, the pitcher will get more strikeouts here because the catcher's better at pitch framing, so we don't have to build that in. He's sort of teased that out a little bit, and it's kind of a nice touch, especially if you are a gamer that enjoys contemporary seasons. I mean, what other sim is doing that? I mean, it just isn't there. So
Yeah, I mean, I kind of see it as a little bit like handling a pitching staff. So like, for example, if his he calls that his umpire rating. So the umpire rating is high, and then you're in between the umpire rating and your range, I think, is where the walks are. So and I'm sure there's stats for that. You've got two catchers on a team, and it's very possible that when one guy's catching, there's more strikeouts, fewer walks. And so again, I've never seen another game do that, but it kind of gives you the impression of handling the staff, framing, being able to frame the strikes. It's an interesting element.
It is. It builds in that Contreras problem for the Cardinals this year, right? So if the stats back it up, then the Cardinals' complaints about Contreras catching would be right, and that would be reflected next year in Contreras's card in the 2023 set that he creates. If they're not right, that'll show too, and that the Cardinal pitchers are just whining about Contreras for no reason.
Right.
I mean, it's an interesting. Again, you're learning about the players. You're learning something about the game and the teams, and that's unique.
Yeah, and that's again, I mean, for me, cards and dice baseball it's a lot of imagination. And so I tend to thrive on games like I've been playing some Status Pro Advanced, and it's kind of the same way. There's a lot of things that really aid in your imagination, some descriptions, things like that. But this game as well, not only the rare, the unusual, exciting, interesting plays, just things like that. Now I do know that the umpire rating at one point he had it as a drop strike, 2 to 3 ground out or 2 to 3 put out. He kind of got away from that. I personally will roll a decider die when that comes up. So, if it's, the decider pops up, then it's a framed strike. If it doesn't, it's a 2 to 3, strikeout. But again, little things like that to me keep it interesting. That's why I went to baseball, is because of those little anomalies, odd things that would happen that, you just never know. And so it keeps you coming back. So again, things like, framing the ball, the catchers, it just gives you that it helps my imagination, and that makes me enjoy the game more.
Right. That's the other side. Am I having fun? Am I enjoying? or am I just killing time? And that makes it fun.
Now, I don't know if you could speak to this or not, but it's interesting. So, like for example, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, it's still recording, I think. So
Yeah.
it says it is. That was weird. His stamina is very interesting. You get to a certain point, you give up a single walk, or basically a base hit or runner. You add to it, and then you add 10 to the sixth, the ballpark die. What interests me is that it gets gradually worse but the highest is walks. I wonder why walks wouldn't be lower down with the single. Seems to me like it would be, because again, the whole point is that he's getting tired. He's going to get a worse result. But on the ballpark, the walks are always last before the deep drive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my couple of things about that. One is that I think that pitcher stamina is the toughest thing to do well in a sim. I think to me, there's nothing more difficult to account for well. Either first as what's going to trigger fatigue, and then second, what's going to be the consequence. I think both of those pieces, how will you know that the pitcher's fatigued, number one, and then how bad is the pitcher going to get, number two. We know pretty much that, I mean, people talk about the third time through the order being a problem for pitchers in today's baseball. But if you look back statistically, it's always been a problem. The problem is that people who long for complete games remember Tom Seaver, and they remember Catfish Hunter, and they remember Nolan Ryan. But they don't remember Kevin Coble, and they don't remember Jim McAndrew, and they don't remember Bill Hands, especially in the second half of his career. So it's easy to glamorize that. Now, so you've got your trigger, which he has set up. And I think what he's looking at there is that what he wants to do is to have room in the rating, in the consequence for fatigue. He wants to have room for the loss of control to be highlighted. And the loss of control is the additional walks. Now, it could also be other things too. It could be like, hanging breaking balls for extra bases. But I think what he wants to do there is to highlight the fact that not only are you going to get hit harder, like some sims do, where you jack up the batter's batting average, but you don't necessarily account for the walks. But he wants plenty of room there to account for the walks. And so my guess is that he's trying to highlight that as a particular part of pitcher fatigue. They lose their stuff. Not only are they losing their control inside the strike zone where the homers go, but outside the strike zone where the pitcher isn't, or the batter's not even going to swing at the pitch. That's my guess.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
It's kind of ingenious in the sense that what it trumps his competition on is that the increased walk numbers, which some do, a few do, but not too many. Most of them focus on batting average and slugging going up as a result of fatigue.
Yeah, I mean, as you described that's very good. It's actually more realistic than it is, because again, my thought is he's trying to make it gradually be worse. So obviously, a triple is worse than a walk. However, in real life, there's, like you said, there's, when you get tired, is it not only hanging things, it's that you're not able to find a strike zone.
Right.
And so probably the more tired you are, the strike zone would probably be like the end of the line, and so he's
right.
making it more realistic than he is a penalty.
Right.
And that's great. Yeah, that's actually, yeah. I knew there had to be a rhyme and a reason to it. I just couldn't figure it out. But I was thinking, you're penalizing the pitcher, but based on that, he's making it more realistic, and that very good.
Well, and that's where that, those dead ball ratings are going to come in, right?
Mhm.
Because he's got, I mean, you have pitcher fatigue in the dead ball era for sure, no question. But now, how are you going to adjust that pitcher's performance in that particular and then very unique period of baseball history? That's going to be good stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about that. Um, the card size. At first, I didn't think I would like it because they're kind of big. Matter of fact, I'd say um, Strat's probably bigger in square footage, maybe, or at least close to it. But this is more of a square. However, having put them on my table, I really, really like it. And this is where again, I compare it to Strat because Strat's my game. Um, you got the color coded. The teams are color coded, which is really nice. You've got their ages, which I really like. You got the stats. He's got a really good, the right amount of stats so that you can look at the card and kind of get an idea of what the player can do. Um, you got left-right splits for pitchers and hitters, which is great. That's a big deal for me. Um, and but the size of the cards, and he's added the numbers, the uniform numbers, which is kind of geeky, but I love it. It's just you imagine, Chuck Rainey, number 30,
Sure.
even in my mind, you bring in a pinch hitter, number 3, Steve Sachs, again, little things like that to me add a great deal. So I like the cards, and also the PDF. He has something worked out where you can go to Amazon. There's perforated 6, 6 per sheet, and he's got it laid out to where it's cut and paste pretty much. You just bring up PDF and print it off, and the perforation is great. It's a lot like Strat. There's no white boogers, which I hate.
Right.
And so even though mostly right now he's PDF, he has a pretty sweet setup to where that you can get those off pretty nicely.
Yeah, I mean, the card size is good. I don't know that it really. There's two things that are more important to me than card size. One is the size of the font because my eyes are horrible,
Right.
and they're not going to get better. And so is the font readable and is color used? And he does both those things. I know from being a teacher that the brain organizes information better when different color is used to take in the information, to process, to provide the information. And so sims that don't have it, that go straight black and white or just straight one color, are just more difficult, and smaller fonts are more difficult. And if there isn't white space on a card or in instructions for that matter, where if I want to write a note, I can write one, or if I just don't want to be overwhelmed with stimuli on this card or on these instructions, but I need some process space, it's there. And so I appreciate that as well. I remember during the pandemic, people were asking me for pine tar cards to be um, on perforated sheets. And I remember how difficult, I mean, I was looking and I had my printer looking, and it was so difficult to find the right size that would feed correctly and all that stuff. But if he's done that, God bless him. I mean, that's
Yeah,
a
I can't say this about many, but I'm almost as happy with. I did get the 1950 printed set, which they're really good. The cardstock's a little better than what you get from Amazon and do yourself. But I can say that I'm happy with my PDFs because I don't have to cut them. They just tear apart very easily. Again, no white boogers, and so
yeah.
of all the PDFs in the game, I feel like this one is the best. At least for my experience.
Well, that's a huge thing because I mean, I know I know customers like perforated sheets, boy, and if you can get those that line up right and print right, that's a huge bonus. Because PDFs are popular with so many people. I mean, it's kind of like 50-50 or not 50-50. People like splits or not splits. I mean, people are very particular about PDFs or printed, and if you can find a source to provide the PDF perforated sheets, that is huge.
Yeah, it is, and I think I think once he gets the printing down, I think that it will definitely improve. The game, the popularity of the game.
Yeah.
Right now, I think he's still trying to figure out print options and hasn't really got there yet. But I will say, his PDFs are definitely, it takes it that next level to that if you do prefer printed.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, boy, print costs
Hmm.
fluctuate so much, and in the last, what would you say, maybe 3-4 years, paper costs have gone way up.
Yeah.
It's And I don't know how you overcome that, because I don't think they're going down either anytime. It's not something that sort of fluctuates with the market. So it's a challenge for any game designer to do. And I understood his initial decision to not mess with printed cards, because I did it for a while and I understand what a pain in the neck it is. Um, because not only do you have the cost of the paper, but shipping costs have gone up. And then how do you manage that? And at what point do you eat those costs? Because you know that you can go to all this work trying to find a printer that's going to print your stuff the way that you like it on card stock that you are satisfied with. And then by the time you've done that, you've got the cost up so high that no one's going to bother to actually order it anyway. And it's just
Right.
a very frustrating thing.
Yeah, and as I understand, he's still trying to figure that part out. But again, at least he's got a pretty nice. Again, you just go to Amazon. It's very relatively cheap. The card stock's pretty good. And mine, they line up pretty good. The right side is off a little bit, but it's not enough to bother me. But again, they're as good as some uh, you know printed that I've ordered.
Yeah.
What I
Yeah.
can do myself, because I got a decent printer. I do enough printing that I invested in a decent printer, so that helps a lot too.
Yeah. It makes a difference.
Lastly, two of my favorite sims are Strad and Replay because they both have computer counterparts. The fact that he started out with Baseball Mogul, which is obviously a computer program, I'm hopeful for a possible computer version of this at some point, because I do like, even though I like the cards on the table, I do like having the computer help for the stats and even lineups, things like that.
Right.
I mean, do you see that being a potential thing in the future based on his history?
Well, I don't see why not. I mean, the question is, I guess, what is he trying to do? And does he think that by putting a computer version of Season Ticket, that he's going to draw customers away from Baseball Mogul? And I
That's a
mean,
good point.
I don't think that they are really the same customer, because you've got a Baseball Mogul, to me, is a macro product. It's the 15,000-foot view of baseball. And I think Season Ticket, you're in there on the very ground level. So I don't see that they're necessarily competing products, but he might see it that way. And
Right.
so that might account for it. If that's not it, then I don't know why he wouldn't. Um, I will say, and I'm one of the few people that I guess think this way, but um, I don't think the hobby is necessarily, people say, well, cards and dice, that hobby's dying out. And I think that would be true if uh, we could say that we had a whole lot of confidence in the ongoing electrical systems and functions in our country. And I don't. So I think that as with all sorts of additional pressure on our power grids I think that there's still going to be a market for cards and dice stuff in the next 50 years as people get older into middle age and later, when they want something to do and they can rely on it, despite the fact that they don't without needing to rely on stable power grids and an electrical supply that's always going to be there, and all of that mess. And so it's a niche market, but I still think that it's going to be a survivable market, just because the world is changing and the things that we've taken for granted, I'm not sure are always going to be there at the same level of consistency that they've been in the past. And so if he doesn't translate season ticket into a computer version or an online version, I still think there's plenty of market out there for it to sell. The question just becomes, to me, if he thinks that it looks like a competitor with Mogul, and I don't, like I said, I don't think that it is, but he might view it that way, and if he does, then we're not gonna see one.
Yeah, I know he said, I read somewhere that it's something he certainly considered, and obviously with his background, he could definitely pull it off. I'll say, for me, well, there's one last thing, if you don't care. I like Stratton that the results are random. If you roll a 3-6, that could be anything depending on who's up to bat. And ATBA, a 66, you know what a 66 is going to be. Replay and 11 is almost always a single, that kind of thing. This one is kind of like replay and ATBA, but for some reason, to me, it doesn't feel the same. I don't know if there's enough variability in it. Like for example, on the hitter's card, usually early 300s are strikeouts. Usually higher numbers are good, but not always. I know like quite often on like the high 300s, like I'm looking at Steve Sachs here, 398 and 399 is a 4-3 double play. Whereas on a lot of players, that's a home run. So in your limited play with it, do you kind of see that it's set up kind of like the low is good, or not necessarily the low is bad, the high is good.
Yeah,
It's actually the opposite, but it doesn't feel that way to me.
yeah, I know what you're saying, and you know what? I don't think about it. It doesn't, and maybe it's from my experience with Pine Tar, where everything was kind. I mean, the low numbers are extra base hits, and higher numbers are outs. I think that I don't know. That's a good question. It hasn't. It never really has bothered me. I know it
Okay.
does bother some people.
Mhm.
Like, for example, I was just reading on Delphi the other day. Someone was the internet guy was talking about, well, when is Strat going to change the card patterns? And I mean, I don't care. It doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't really get to
Okay.
me.
So
Uh,
that's not something I mean, it doesn't, the fact that the low is good and the high is bad, like on payoff pitch, that's just not a concern for you.
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, I definitely know what you're saying about APA and replay. Get that for
Mhm.
sure. Um, but I don't know. I mean, if I've got dice that I'm confident haven't been damaged in some way, I don't know. I feel pretty good that the outcomes are going to work like they're supposed to.
The
So
percentages are the percentages either way.
yeah, kind of. Yeah, I mean, Fall Classic. Kind of like APA in that your doubles are the problem, or the extra base hits area, the singles or the walks. You're going to get on base more likely with doubles than with something else, and that doesn't really get to me. But I certainly know that it bothers some people, and that's what makes the hobby great. We've got there's differences, but
Yeah, I'm one of those guys who prefer the randomness, but again, this one for some reason there's enough randomness in it that it doesn't. Again, when I roll an 11 in replay, and I love replay. I mean, it's a great game. But
absolutely.
it just bugs me for some reason because I know it's going to be a hit. No matter who it is, every great once in a while you'll have somebody who's really, really bad. And the 11's not a hit. But again, 66. But there is some excitement to rolling a 66 because something good is going to happen.
Right.
So I see both. But for a guy who prefers the randomness, even though this one is kind of set up like a replay, there's enough randomness in it that it doesn't feel like that to me. Just
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
you
I
know.
can see that. Sure, absolutely.
Well, I will say this one. I guess what waiting to see, about how the printed sets, what the rest of the century looks like. Whether he does a computer, and then finally for me, playing enough games, to see how the results come out. This one has definitely risen really, really high, really, really fast. I mean, at this point, I would say it's even competing with Strat,
Wow.
and that's a big deal, because I love Strat.
Mm-hmm.
uh, but it does, it gives me that feeling of Strat, but it gives me, the few things that I feel like Strat lack in. This kind of picks up the ball. So again, as I play, if the results continue, to be realistic, and I have every confidence they will, because again, as we've talked about, Clay seems to know his business. And again, he gets into details, when he is discussing things. It's just like, man, this guy, he understands baseball, like you said, and he understands stats, and he understands sims. And so I'm confident it will perform in that area. But it's just a great, great game.
Absolutely, no question. I mean, I think what's going to happen, what you're going to see is you're going to see season ticket, not imitators, but you're going to see people that the Sims that go the next decade or so. You're going to see a season ticket influence in them.
Mm-hmm.
But the sign, I mean, like APA, replay built on APA. Well,
Mm-hmm.
something at some point is going to build on season ticket. That's where I think a good chunk of the hobby is going to go.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he's got something special here. And again, I think, like you said at the beginning of the conversation, once he gets settled and gets it kind of finished, quote unquote, I really hope and believe that this game will really take off, because again, it just does so much very well. It's easy to play, it's fun, it's enjoyable, it keeps you engaged. And you have a creator who is kind of involved in trying to answer questions, and he's involved on the Delphi forum conversations and on the Facebook, and so I think people enjoy that. But
To get a sense that you can get to know this person a little bit well, rather than, the sort of hermits that and can't ask questions and won't reply.
mm-hmm.
He always does.
Yeah.
So
Well, Kurt, I've enjoyed this immensely. Thank you so much.
thank you, my friend, anytime. And I've enjoyed it as well. And we can do it again whenever you like.
And final word, love your channel. Fantastic content. Obviously anybody, probably anybody who's anybody in this hobby already knows about you, but check it out if you haven't. I just love what you do. You bring such a, informative and entertaining. People say imitation is the highest form of a compliment, and it's funny how many of us, will, the unboxings and, what, it's failing me, but why do you say when they strike out, oh yeah, the broccoli cauliflower medley,
Oh, right, right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I have fun, and I think that, and I'm just trying to bring something to the hobby, and if I do that, then that's great. And thank you very much. You're very kind.
And well, you brought a lot. I enjoy your channel immensely. So, but thanks for chatting with me today.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.